If you're just joining, welcome. This is our webinar about negotiating your way to a yes with Amanda Hill. My name is Carly Shearman and I'm the Community Manager here at Women in Digital. Women in Digital is all about connecting, educating and empowering our way to diversity in digital. In today's webinar, as you may have guessed from the title, it's all about negotiation skills. We understand that negotiation can be intimidating. I know I get intimidated by it. And it's one of the largest fears faced by professionals today. But whether it be an important legal or business contract, asking for a salary raise, or just informal day-to-day interactions, good negotiation skills are crucial to have. This webinar will focus on important tips for effectively negotiating, understanding and improving your emotional intelligence, managing and overcoming fear and how not to let emotions derail the process, navigating the fails and pitfalls of negotiation. But before we get underway, I'd love to introduce you to this morning's guest, Amanda Hill. Amanda Hill is a Women in Digital member that I've actually had the pleasure of getting to know over the past few months, and she is beautiful. Her portfolio is as vast as it is impressive. She's an accredited solicitor and mediator, where she studied law at Griffith and then the Harvard Negotiation Institute, no less. She also has her Masters of Law in International and Commercial Dispute Resolution, which she got at the University of Westminster in 2019. So needless to say, if someone was going to do this topic, Amanda is that expert. She has developed world-class skills in this area. Now, just after a slight career pivot from law, she is bringing a SaaS product to the Australian market. So Amanda is the account executive of Thoughtexchange. Thoughtexchange, which we might get to use today, is a software that allows leaders to crowdsource answers to questions in real time. So, for our members, you are probably familiar with how this is going to work, but here is a quick rundown. So in a second, I'm going to hand you over to Amanda and you will spend the next 30 minutes or so learning how to negotiate like a pro. Then I will jump back on with Amanda for a live Q&A. And with that, let's give Amanda a very warm welcome. Amanda, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Carly. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you all for coming along this morning. I know that 45 minutes is not an insignificant amount out of your morning, so I really appreciate that you're coming along to spend the time today. And I also know that there's a lot of webinars happening. There's a lot of great content out there that's being shared. And I'd really like this to be as interactive and have as much participation as possible. So when we get to that part of the webinar where we have a discussion, I really hope you'll join me for a little bit of robust dialogue. So let's get right into it. When I was researching for this presentation, I was on Chris Voss's YouTube channel. And for those of you who don't know, Chris Voss was the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI for a number of years. And from those years of experience, he wrote the book, Never Split the Difference. So this is where the majority of the concepts that we'll be discussing today come from. And I highly recommend having a read if you're able to get down to your local library, if you're not in Victoria, or if you're able to purchase online. Never Split the Difference. It's a really fantastic book and it's got a lot of the concepts we'll be talking about. I wanted to go through and just cherry pick a few of the tools and techniques that you might be able to take away and start to implement really quickly into your negotiations so that you've got something meaningful from this. And I guess with that, it might be a good time to have a look at what I intend to cover today. So I've divided the webinar into 3 sessions. In the first part, we'll have a look at emotional intelligence and why that's a foundation for every negotiation that you're going to have. Secondly, we'll move into some negotiation techniques and we'll have a look at specifically mirroring, the power of no, and calibrated questions. And then thirdly, we'll have a discussion and we'll run a thought exchange like Carly was just mentioning. We'll ask a question and then you'll get to have a chance to contribute your thoughts. You'll get to read and rate the thoughts of others and we'll end up with a prioritized thought list at the end from which I'll facilitate a discussion. So that's what I'm intending to cover today. So while I was researching and I was having a look through various resources and I was considering what it was that I should be bringing to you today for the Women in Digital audience, I was on the Chris Voss YouTube channel and I was watching all of these images of FBI personnel toting guns and storming into buildings, and in these really tense and impactful situations. And I thought, gosh, that's really interesting. How am I going to get the attention of the Women in Digital audience in a similar fashion? And I kept starting to reflect on, okay, so who was it that's influenced me throughout my negotiation career? Who is it that I'd like to think really helped me understand the ability to build rapport and persuade? And I kept coming back to the same person, Oprah. Now, you might not immediately think that Oprah and FBI hostage negotiators are on the same level when it comes to impactfulness. But if we have a think about Oprah's career over the course of all of those years that she was gracing the televisions in our lounge room, have a think about what it was that she did with the guests when she interviewed them and invited them onto the show. She had to make them feel really comfortable. She had to quickly build rapport. And then once that rapport was built, she had to use that to uncover some of the most deepest and personal parts of their lives, those intimate secrets that they probably didn't want to share, things to do with adultery and white collar crime, etc. And then she had to make sure that was done within a 30 to 40 minute segment and in front of millions of people. So if we think about a person's ability to build rapport, to persuade, and to influence, Oprah most definitely is right up there with some of the best in the world at doing those skills. So then if we have a think about what Oprah and our FBI hostage negotiators have in common, and they have emotional intelligence. They have emotional intelligence in spades. And these are the topics that we're going to consider when we look at emotional intelligence today, because it underpins just about every negotiation that we have. And while you're having a look at that, I want to paint a picture as to why it's important for us to think about this. And I guess it's also important at this point to clarify that when I speak about negotiation, I'm not just talking about negotiation that we have in a corporate and a commercial context. I'm talking about the negotiations that we have in our everyday lives. The one that you have with your mother, the one that you have with your partner over who's going to take out the garbage, the one that you have with your children. Essentially, any conversation that starts with "I want" is entering into a negotiation. The other party is asking a request of you, and then you need to decide how you're going to deal and respond with that request and what concessions you're going to make in order to arrive at an outcome. So thinking about all of those negotiations that you have in your life, who has been in a negotiation that looks like this? Where it's really calm and you're sat next to each other on the couch. You're hearing each other out. Everybody's having a think about what everybody else says. You're creatively generating options so as to expand the pie and arrive at the best possible outcome. Who's been in that kind of negotiation? I can probably count the number of negotiations that I've had in a similar vein to that on one hand throughout my entire career. What my negotiations tend to look like is something more like this. And even if we take the physical aspects out of it, they're fraught with emotion. There's tension. There's people who are not entirely sure what they want. They're angry. They're frustrated. There's anxiety. There's racing hearts. There's sweaty palms. There's all of this emotion that's built within this exchange. And what we need to do is we need to try and de-escalate that. So you might be familiar with the phrase separating the people from the problem. And that phrase was actually coined by Fisher and Urey in their negotiating Bible, Getting to Yes. That's the handbook that forms the foundation for the majority of the Harvard Negotiations executive education courses on negotiation. And it's really wonderful. It's a great resource. It's really grounded in logical problem solving and rational decision making, which is wonderful if negotiations were also held in that context. But we just discovered that they're not. They're fraught with emotion. They're tense. We don't really know what's going on. We don't even really necessarily know what we want. We just know that we don't want the other side to have it. So when you actually bring that back into the realm of negotiation, how then are you meant to separate the people from the problem if their emotions are the problem? The answer is you can't. And so what we need to do is we need to bring in emotional intelligence and emotional regulation so as to de-escalate the situation, to bring it down to that state of calm where people can actually hear each other, they can listen to the other side, they can speak calmly, They're able to creatively generate solutions, and then you're able to arrive at an outcome. So for me, one of the key areas that I've been working on is increasing my emotional intelligence. And I do that by, I've printed out an emotions wheel, and it's next to me at my desk. It's just on my pin board. So if I'm typing an email that requires an emotional adjective or some kind of emotive word, then I'll type the word that I'm familiar with. I'll have a look over at my emotions wheel, and I'll identify something else that might be slightly more appropriate or something new, and then I'll pop that in instead. In doing so, that's a really practical tip to try and expand your emotional vocabulary. The reason we want to be able to expand our emotional vocabulary is because we want to recognize, understand, and label emotions. So recognizing, understanding, and labeling emotions is part of the ruler technique. And Brene Brown actually recently did a podcast on this in her podcast series, Unlocking Us. I can't quite remember the name of the episode, but if anyone's interested, I'm sure I can Google it. I'll find it for you. But it's all about the ruler technique. The reason we use the ruler technique is because when you are recognizing, understanding, and labeling someone's emotion, what you're doing is you're deploying tactical empathy. And tactical empathy essentially is saying to somebody else, I recognize what you're going through, I understand the situation, and I'm trying to figure out how this works in your world. It's a really quick way to build rapport, and it's a shortcut to intimacy. So in terms of how you use the ruler technique in your daily life or in your negotiations, you start with the phrasings, it looks like, it sounds like, it seems like, followed by the emotion. So a practical example of this is you might be in the workplace when we're all in physical workplaces. You might be in the workplace and you've noticed that your colleague has become quite flustered and they're getting a little bit short and snappy because they've got a workload that just seems burdensome. So you might say to them, it seems like you're really frustrated because you have so many competing priorities right now and you don't know where to start. What can I do to help? In recognizing that there's some underlying tension there, understanding what it is and labeling the emotion, you're immediately building rapport with your colleague and you're giving them a chance to breathe a sigh of relief and to de-escalate. So that's a really easy tip and trick that you can start to implement into your negotiations to bring things back to a state of calm. And when we're speaking about bringing things to a state of calm, one of the ways that you can start to emotionally regulate within a negotiation is by recognizing your response to conflict. So we're probably all familiar with these guys. We've got the fighters, the flighters, and my personal favorite, the freezers. And recognizing your own response to emotional conflict means that once you know which category you're in, you can also start to identify the physiological symptoms that occur when you're in that heightened state of awareness. You can start to recognize if your palms are sweating, if you're starting to feel that heat rising up, and you can start to mitigate that and take steps to bring you back to a state of calm. So I know that I keep talking about this state of calm, and I probably haven't explained yet why that's important. So the reason we want to stay in a state of calm is because when we're in a state of calm or positivity, our brain has 31% more operating power. So think about that. That's 31% more opportunity for us to hear from the other party, for us to be able to verbalize our arguments in an articulate way, 31% more for us to be able to creatively generate solutions and to be able to come to a resolution that we're happy with. So when I say that it's really imperative that we have this emotional intelligence so that we can bring ourselves back to a state of calm, that's why we're biohacking our brain's power and our brain's capacity in order to give us a foundation from which to implement the techniques that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So we've recognized then that we're in this heightened state of awareness. We know our response to conflict. We can recognize the other party's response to conflict, and we're understanding their emotions. We're labeling them. How then do we de-escalate when things are still rising and getting tense? One of the ways that we can do that is by slowing it down. So I know this might seem very simple, but it's incredibly effective. So when you recognize those physiological symptoms in a negotiation, and those are perfectly normal, the increased heartbeat, the sweaty palms, We can place both of our feet on the floor, ground down as though the four corners of your feet, as though you're in yoga. You have anchors or tree roots coming out at the bottom of those soles, and they're anchoring right down into the earth. So you're really grounded. Once you're grounded, you can then start to take a few deep breaths. I know we all know this. I know we're all familiar with it, but sometimes we need to be reminded of it. So we take a few breaths. Once we've done that, we then slow down the pace with which we're speaking. One of the first things that's an indicator of a heightened state of awareness or a heightened state of tension or anxiety in a negotiation is shoulders start to rise and people speak really quickly. They speed up what they're saying. When we're trying to slow it down and de-escalate, we want to slow down the pace with which we're saying things. We even want to slow down our hand gestures if we can, if you're a gesturer like myself. And we want to increase the amount that we pause. Doing all of those things will naturally bring you back into a state of calm, biohack that additional 31% of brain power that we need. And in addition to that, it's also bringing your counterpart and the other people in the room back into a state of calm as well, which is really helpful because it's not just you that needs to be in that additional brain space to be able to negotiate. It's the other people in the room as well. So the more that you're able to embrace these emotional regulation techniques, slow things down, recognize, understand, and label, and bring back that really calm foundation, the more that you're able to implement the additional negotiating techniques that we're about to discuss. So I hope we're all really clear then on why emotional intelligence is a foundation for just about every negotiation that you're going to have. Now we'll have a look at 3 different types of negotiation techniques themselves. We'll look at mirroring, the power of no, and also calibrated questions. And when we're doing that, I want us to look at it through a lens of discovery. And what I mean by a lens of discovery is negotiation isn't a battle of wills. It's not about pitting one side against each other and seeing who comes out on top. Certainly that has been the modus operandi previously, but we're shifting to a different paradigm of negotiation now. And it's best to think of every time that you uncover a new piece of insight or a new bit of information, that's taking you one step closer to be able to use that information to influence the situation and arrive at the outcome that it is that you desire. So if you go into a negotiation through the lens of discovery with the idea that you're trying to extract as much information as possible from the other side and observe their reaction to things, we're extracting and we're observing, then that will provide the information that you need to be able to influence and persuade to arrive at the outcome that you want. A great negotiator is able to actually question all of the assumptions and the biases that we have, that we're operating with, while the rest of us are just blindly accepting those. So great negotiators remain open to the possibilities, they're fluid, they're extracting information, and they're using that lens of discovery when they're applying the various techniques. So, mirroring. Mirroring is essentially imitation, and we've all witnessed it, we've all seen it done. It can be done with things like speech patterns, it can be done with your body language, it can be done with your tone of voice, with your pitch, with your pace, with the pause. And what it's generally indicating is that people are in sync, that there's rapport that's being built and that they're bonding. And one of the quickest ways you can do this, just to test it out, is if you're walking down the street and you smile at a stranger and they on reflex, they smile back at you. That's mirroring at play. And understanding that reflex that causes somebody to smile, that's what's going to allow you to hack into building rapport and creating a shortcut to intimacy, which is what you also want to do in a negotiation. The mirroring technique that Voss suggests in his book is that it's really simple. It's just repeating back the last 3 words that the person has said. So if someone was saying to you, I need this by Friday, you'd say this by Friday, and you raise the tone of your voice on the end to show that it's a question. There's an inflection at the end there because you're approaching it through that lens of discovery. And you also want your tone to indicate that what you're asking is, help me to understand why. So if we approach it in that way, mirroring is really simple, but incredibly effective. To give you a real world example, one of your colleagues or a boss might come to you and say, I need copies of these files made by 12 o'clock on Friday. You've already got all these competing priorities that are happening within your space, and you're trying to understand why this needs to take precedence or where it fits within those competing priorities that you already have. So your response would be to calmly pause and then say, need these by 12 p.m. And you raise with the inflection at the end. And what inevitably happens is that invokes that smile reflex that we were talking about, the mirroring, the bond building, the rapport building. And the person will come back to you and say, oh, I need them by 12 p.m. because I'm attending this meeting at 1 and I need to take the copies with me. So then you can understand that there's a hard stop. You've uncovered another piece of information in the discovery process. You've uncovered that they actually need this because there's another meeting, and also that these need to go there. So you can then prioritize your workload around that. One of the great things about mirroring is, and Voss highlights this really nicely in Never Split the Difference, is that it allows you to confront without confrontation. So there's a 5-step process that Voss outlines. And again, it's really quite simple. It's based around mirroring. You start, and tone is a really big player in that. So you start with your late night FM DJ voice. You stop into that soft, slow, reassuring, you've got control of this situation voice. You start with, I'm sorry. That sets the tone that you're seeking to understand. It's building rapport, and that it's not meant to be, this isn't meant to be delivered as an act of aggression. And then you repeat the last 3 words of what the person has said, and then you pause. You just wait for them to fill in the blanks, because people are uncomfortable with silence. So if you just repeat back their last 3 words, you pause, they'll inevitably fill that. And then you can repeat this process and repeat this process in a motion of discovery until such time as you are able to obtain all of the information it is that you need to move forward. So that's mirroring. The second technique that I would like to talk about is the power of no. And most of us think, when we hear no, we think that that's the end of the negotiation. The other side's finished and we're done. But actually, no is really where negotiations start. Once someone has said no to you, they're more open and they're more receptive to hearing what it is that you have to say, that the offers that you have to present. The reason for that is, when we say no, we feel like we've got a sense of control. When we have a sense of control over a situation, we have psychological safety. Change is really scary, and we humans, we're a bit of a lazy bunch. We like to follow the path of least resistance. So we're going to keep going with whatever it is that we have in place at the moment, by virtue of the fact that it's easy, unless we get to a point where there's enough of an incentive for us to change our behavior. So if you frame your questions in such a way that you enable someone to say no from the outset, that then gives them protection from change. They're psychologically safe. They feel like they are in control, and then they almost de-escalate themselves, and they're able to hear better the things that you're trying to suggest to resolve the problem. Again, like with mirroring, hearing these techniques, they all require practice. So hearing no requires practice, because we need to understand that this isn't a rejection of us. It's not necessarily even a rejection of our idea. It's just what the other person needs to do to make themselves feel psychologically safe. So now that we know that no doesn't really mean no, these are some of the other things. These are some of the other things that it can potentially mean in a negotiation. I'm not ready yet to agree. I don't really understand. I want to talk it over with someone else. Perhaps they're not the decision maker. So these are the things that no actually means in the subtext of a negotiation. And the way that we continue and we discover so that no isn't just a hard stop is we, again, ground, take a breath, and then we ask questions such as, what about this doesn't work for you? Something that's going to uncover and unveil the real meaning behind the no. Or It seems like there's something here that's bothering you. Help me to understand that. Those kind of phrases. And the third technique I would like to discuss is calibrated questions. And these are really your journalist questions, if we think about that. They're open-ended questions that are designed to uncover various bits of information so that you then can have a landscape to be able to say, this is where we're sitting. I'm going to use this to influence and to persuade, influence and to persuade. They really are the who, what, why, when, where. And as you become really comfortable with asking these kind of questions, you'll understand that they can be whittled down even further, mainly to the what and the how. So to give you an example of some of these calibrated questions, I've written some out here. And one of the ones that Boss keeps coming back to time and time again throughout this book, throughout all of his hostage negotiations, is how am I supposed to do that? The last one on the slide there. Initially, when I read this, I found this to be quite confronting, and it seemed like it was going to be difficult to implement into my negotiations. On reflection, when you start to practice it, again, similar to the mirroring and hearing no, it's not that difficult to really start to implement it in the interactions that you are having. So to give you a workplace example first, go back to the over-prioritization, the overloaded colleague. Your boss has already given you 5 tasks that week and they ask you to do another. What we do in that situation is you summarize all the other work that you've already been given with a gentle tone, and then mention this new task, and then ask with the tone of wanting to understand, how am I supposed to do that? All of a sudden, asking that question then brings the other person into the problem solving, and they want to feel like they can help you prioritize there. So you're harnessing some of their brain power to solve the problem for you. In terms of a personal example, one of the things you might have on your plate for the weekend is Saturday sport. So your son might come to you and say, Mummy, I need to go to dance class on Saturday, and your daughter might come to you and say, Mummy, I need to go to soccer. You've already committed to driving your daughter to soccer. She got in first. She was very efficient. And when your son comes to you and demands the same thing, you can say, I've already committed to driving my daughter to soccer, to driving Chelsea to soccer, shall we say. How am I supposed to also drive you to dance? You're not expecting your 7-year-old to be able to solve the problem for you, definitely not. But just engaging them in that conversation invokes a different part of the brain power, and it starts to make them feel like they're involved in those problem solving and decision making conversations as well. So that is the wavetop overview, hitting the wavetop overview of some of the negotiation tools that are actually in Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. We had a look at why emotional intelligence is the foundation for negotiation. And then we considered 3 different techniques: mirroring, the power of no, and calibrated questions. And so now I'm hoping we can actually open up to a little bit more of a discussion, because I'd really like this to be interactive and a bit more of a networking exercise than just me sitting and talking at you, I suppose, for the remainder of the time. But before you follow me over into the discussion part of the conversation, I'd really like you to follow me here first. And if you have a look at the top there, at Thoughtexchange, that's our handle on Twitter and on Instagram, and that's my LinkedIn handle down the bottom. What I'd really love to do now is for us to have a little bit of a discussion using that foundation of emotional intelligence that we just established to talk about some of the challenges that we're navigating in these uncertain times, either personally or professionally or both. And I'm going to run a thought exchange for us to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And Carly, I might ask you also on some of the logistics around this. Are we able to have people come off mute and participate in a discussion?
This is a great question that I have never done before. But yes, I think what we can do is if someone wants to have a chat with us, we can promote them to a panelist, and that way we'll be able to see and hear them.
What we'll do while we're having a look at that as well is I am just going to, because Carly, you are so lovely navigating that, I'm just going to pop a link in the chat.
Oh, that link's in the chat, but you can pop it back in
there. Okay. And I'd love everybody just to click on the link, and we're going to go through and we're going to do a thought exchange. I'm also going to share my screen. So that's the 4 minutes up. Isn't it interesting when you're in a webinar or you're in a room and you've got all of these people in there, 4 minutes of silence can really feel like a lifetime. It's incredibly interesting when you're facilitating these discussions and you see various people use our tool and they feel the need to fill that silence with all of these different instructions, but actually just remaining calm and quiet is a really good thing. So we have some really good thoughts in here. There's some really good basis for discussion if people would like to join us. I'm going to start at the top, and knowing how to plan for the future in the time of uncertainty. This personally for me really resonates. I am opening a new market here in Australia. We're a Canadian company. Stacey is also someone that I work with who's on the chat with us. And we have a really strong presence in North America, so in the USA and in Canada. But we're new to Australia. This is very new. Our Australian office, I moved here, we opened March 16. So knowing how to plan and do a go-to-market strategy during this time is incredibly difficult. And embracing uncertainty is something that we all have just had to do, I suppose. So is there do we have a brave soul who this was their thought and they would like to speak to it? Or if you rated this 5 stars, would anyone like to speak to it, why they rated it 5 stars?
Hi, Amanda. It's Amanda. I actually have a really similar reason why I put this forward.
Yes.
So, we're launching our business Freelancing Gems to market at the moment. So we're thinking about events, and obviously now we're thinking more about webinars and how we're going to engage with our community. So it's a really, really similar approach in our go-to-market. So usually we would plan for the future, but it's how to plan for that future when the future is changing day by day.
Absolutely. Amanda, where are you based as well?
We're in Brisbane, so things are changing by the hour here, basically, because, we have had a lot of freedom up until the last couple of days, again, with a potential second wave coming through. So we are a national business, though, and we were looking to branch out into Sydney and Melbourne events, but it's how to network and get our brand out into market, from Bris Vegas.
I hear that completely. And I feel like as well, Melbourneites probably are feeling this incredibly so, particularly because they were all set to come out of lockdown. And then before you know it, you're right back into there again. And so whatever strategy you had in place when you thought you were over the hump and you're coming out the other side has been completely disbanded now. And Carly and I were chatting just before we jumped in here, and she said that there was a live announcement from the Premier while we were talking. So rules were changing in Queensland just before we started.
Yeah, I can see it on the TV behind me, actually. We're working from home today, where we have been working in a co-share working space, and we'll continue to do that until otherwise told. But it's just changing again by the day on what we think we could potentially do, like lunch and learns and breakfasts and things like that to network versus going back and going virtual again, which I love. And I think this is a really great example of how it can be done really well and interactively. So it's just to save the webinar burnout.
And I hope I'm going to piggyback off that. And I feel like this might even come into the staying as productive and optimistic as before. But I was having a chat. Actually, Stacey was a part of this chat, so feel free to jump in here, Stace. But I was having a chat with some of our team members that I was saying, there is so much wonderful content out there in the world, and the webinars are fantastic these days. And I am sick of being talked at. I just want to have an opportunity to network, to be able to say, okay, this is what we're talking about today, or whatever it might be, and just engage in some back and forth, some two-way communication. And there's very few groups, I feel, that are doing that right now. I don't know what anyone else's experience around that is.
Like I feel very similar. Like I feel like this webinar is amazing. Like it's probably the most interactive one we've had, but I definitely have webinar fatigue as well. And it feels like we've kind of gone backwards in terms of like the sit down, shut up kind of TV era was very much like 70s, 80s, 90s. And then talkback radios come in and that sort of thing. And it's really changed. And then social media has kind of added an extra layer of interactivity. And now COVID, and it's back to those webinars where it's like, just sit there and we'll tell you, and there isn't that interaction element. So I feel that way as well.
Exactly. And does anyone have would anyone like to speak to the staying as productive and optimistic before COVID to work towards your dreamed progress and company? Would anyone like to put their hand up and be the brave soul that would like to speak to that? Or if you rated it a 5 even, if you rated it a 5 and it resonated with you?
Anne-Marie, does this kind of, is this something that you're feeling or maybe what?
Oh, absolutely. Hello.
Yeah.
So I'm Anne-Marie Walton. This is fantastic. I already sent you a lovely LinkedIn message. And thanks to Women in Digital. Definitely staying productive because I found my workload has increased, and then trying to find a balance as to what I should do versus what I want to do, what's going to bring the most outcomes, and being realistic in those expectations. And so some of those things you were talking about before with managing discussions with people and that juggling, I find will be really beneficial.
Absolutely. And that's an interesting part of what's happened, I think, with COVID is that I was listening to a panel that Dominic Price from Atlassian is on. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Dominic's work, but he's a work futurist. And he's fantastic at really identifying the core, getting to the core of an issue. And one of the things he was saying was that really the way that we interact and relate with people hasn't changed. You ask them about yourself, about themselves rather. You listen to them and then you interact, like you respond. But the methodology that how we do that has changed. So we don't do it by the water cooler anymore. So how do we recreate that kind of informal chat where we can show up and still help people understand that we do care about them? And Anne-Marie, some of the things that you were saying there just sort of resonated with me about that. Like, how do we keep those moments going and create that networking environment where it doesn't feel stifled or awkward? And I think it's a matter of practice, not dissimilar to the negotiation techniques that we were talking about. This feels kind of awkward at first, but once you get used to it and once you get used to having these kind of discussions in this manner, it becomes second nature.
I agree, that's cool.
And managing long to-do lists, getting things done in an impactful manner while staying sane. Sanity is very important, 31% more brain power, as we were talking about. Did anyone rate this a 5 that would like to speak to it? We've gone shy. That's totally fine. This is actually something that I'm happy to keep talking if people don't mind. So I am reading at the moment Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and what he speaks about is we often have, if we think of ourselves as a circle and all of these different arrows coming out in all of these different directions, and we're scattering our energy all over the place with things that do seem really important at the time, and they most likely are really important. However, if we consider that same circle and then put all of those arrows that were going in different directions just in the one direction, how far up the tree can that arrow actually get when you're focused and aligned on just the one task? And I think that's an approach that we do need to start taking to to-do lists, because when you're at home and when you're working from home, you almost have 2 lists running in parallel. Yes, you've got your work list and you've got your number of tasks that seems to just keep growing and growing because you're working now where your place of rest is as well. So unless you've got really firm boundaries around that, you can just keep popping into work and keep checking emails and doing all of those things. And not dissimilarly on the other side, because you're at home, you think, okay, so I need to get up and stretch my legs. I'm just going to quickly vacuum. And then before you know it, you're cleaning your ceiling fans of dust because that hasn't happened in so long. And you think to yourself, that to-do list is growing as well. So we need to get some kind of container around those, I think. And we need to start thinking about how do we identify really what those priorities are and move those forward so that we don't end up with a never-ending story of to-do lists, because that that really doesn't help us with our mental health and our sanity. And that really rolls nicely into this next Melbourne-based thought. Do we have any Melbourneites on the call that would like to speak to that?
Yeah, it's just kind of seeing the mental numbers every day. So like today's over 600 again, and people not doing the right thing, and kind of the like trying to focus on work, but also having the kind of overwhelming dread of everything outside is scary. It's just really hard right now.
Yeah, and for a bit of context as well, Jasmine, you're with Hub Australia, so a community-based organisation, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess there's also that additional element of your work is all about bringing people together and that sort of thing, and you're missing that aspect of your role as well.
Yeah, and not being around people and kind of understanding why people aren't necessarily keen to come into the workspaces, but yeah, trying to kind of stay afloat while also considering that is is kind of a big balancing game.
What Jasmine, and if you don't want to share this, you don't have to, but what are some of the things that you're doing just to kind of keep that sanity, to stay positive while you're in lockdown 2.0?
I've been using Headspace like a few times every day, the meditation app.
Awesome.
And I also I just make myself go out for walks. I've found a lot of kind of off the beaten path walks where there aren't as many people, but I'm also in a highly populated area, so it's a bit tricky to get alone time, but you find a way.
You really do. And that's I love that you mentioned some not only meditation but physical activity there. We have recently come off the back of our revenue meeting H2, which involved a lot of 1 a.m. starts for the Antipodean amongst the Canadian company. That's fine. But what our organisation talked about was almost a triangular approach to success, and the top of the pinnacle for them was health, like your personal and individual mental and physical health and wellness. And I think the fact that you brought an example that showed both of those things is really wonderful, because if we're not operating at optimal capacity, then how are we meant to be bringing our best selves to work, and how are we meant to be doing the best work that we're able to do? It's really difficult to do in those situations. There's some really lovely thoughts in here. Things like uncertainty, trying to find a new job. My heart goes out to you right now. If there's anything I can do, please send me a message on LinkedIn. I don't know whose thought that was, but I just know that job hunting at this moment in time is not an easy task. So do please let me know if there's anything I can do. Review your resume, whatever it might be. Keeping worry at bay. I've stepped out of industry to reskill a master's. Congratulations, whoever's thoughts that is. That's fantastic. And I can understand your concern when you graduate, what the job market will look like, but well done you on pivoting and doing your master's. I'm not sure if anyone would like to speak to that. We can have a little celebration. It's totally fine if you don't want to as well. No, we're celebrating.
I just need that. There we go.
Networking, shutting off, planning my financial life. So there's a lot of great thoughts in here. What I'm actually going to do is, after we finish the webinar, I'm going to do up a report using the platform, and I'll have that for Carly to send around in the email with everybody, so that you can have a look at what that looks like on the back end as well. And Carly, I wasn't sure if there was anything in the chat that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so what we might do is, if you have any questions for Amanda, submit them now. But Mo just sent a message through during the chat, and she said that she's got a bit of a tricky situation going on right now, and maybe we could talk through that as like a real world example.
Love that. Yes, please. Love that. Mo, over to you.
Mo, are you happy if I turn your mic on?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. How you going?
Hi, good. Yeah, so I actually came across Never Split the Difference because I was having so much trouble with this particular colleague. And I loved the book, but I actually loved your session because I've been thinking that I almost need like a Cliff's Notes version so I can remind myself of all the tactics and when to use what. And I have tried all the tactics on other people and they've worked really successfully. But oh man, this guy, it's like it's killing me. In person, he's the type of person that will just keep talking and talking and talking and talk over the top of you and interrupt you. And I'm a pretty forthright person anyway. And now we're trying to do these negotiations over Slack. So yesterday I tried the tactic of slowing it down, which actually worked very well. And I only responded to him like every hour to 3 hours, because he just will send, you'll write one Slack message and he'll write back 10, which is like really full on. But the issue primarily comes out of the fact that we're peers, and he makes decisions about work that my team's going to do, but I'm not involved in the decision. My team's not involved in the decision, and I have nothing I can offer him in a negotiation. So I need him to change his mind. And it just ends up like he just says no and just keeps saying no and keeps putting his foot down. And I've tried escalating it to my manager, but my manager is not very good with confrontation. I just feel like I'm banging my head against a wall. It's like, yeah.
And that sounds so frustrating, like incredibly frustrating, because you're approaching it with the best intentions and you're trying to negotiate something where you feel like you don't have a lot of value to incentivize the change, I suppose. When you were speaking just now, Mo, what I'm hearing is that it sounds like you need to create a behavioral shift in this colleague. Would that be an appropriate summary?
Yeah, he's actually, after some of our interactions where other people were in the room, he actually did get pulled up for like the way that he speaks to me, and like he'll blatantly just, I'll be like, here's evidence of this problem, let's try and fix the problem, and he's like, there's no problem. And you're like, literally. And so I've had other people advocate and be like, well, there is evidence of that problem and we do need to fix it, but then just nothing happens. So I know people have spoken to him about his like behavior in those conversations, but it doesn't change the fact that I still need to work with him as a peer.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally hear that. And so there's a couple of things that are coming to me as we talk about this. One, I don't want to undermine any HR procedure or anything like that. So if it gets to the point where that's the route you need to take, please take that, encourage that entirely. And to try and deal with the situation in the meantime, you've already got the book. That's fantastic. I would, if I were you, I'd have another look at the calibrated questions section. The reason I recommend that is there's also an alternative dispute resolution technique called questions before statements. So questions are going to always enable you to keep going through that process of discovery and enable you to bring out the information that hopefully is going to help you identify as to why they're operating this way. Because in order to create a behavioral change and a behavioral shift, we need to understand what's at the core, like what emotion is driving this behavior. And as an outsider listening, it would seem that there's some kind of fear-based response, because that's an immediate no, right? It's an immediate shutdown. And it's almost like, if you think of it from, I'm not labeling this person as a bully, but if you think about it and analogize it to a bully, when a bully is generally fearful of some kind of change or something occurring, so they're going to use aggression to stamp that out. And it just makes me think then, if there clearly is a problem and you've evidenced the problem and they say, no, it's not, immediately to me, I think, okay, Bob, what makes you think there's not a problem here? And I start to go down the questioning path, because then their brain power is used up trying to solve the problems that you're posing, as opposed to reacting with aggression. How does that land? Does that have any resonance?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I have tried some questioning techniques without much luck, but I do like, and I have tried the how am I supposed to, which does not work with him at all. That one is a big fat fail. But I do think I could use the questioning technique better, particularly when it comes to the evidence, because yesterday it was clear the evidence was a really big thing. Thank you very, very much. I really don't want to monopolize your time on this very specific use case. So if anyone else has questions.
And Mo, I like Mikhail. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at pronunciations. Amanda Hill. I have like the most generic Australian name there ever was. What my parents lacked in creativity, they gave me in anonymity. So thank you for that, parents. But I want to agree with the comment in the chat and say, Mo, thank you for bringing that as a real life use case. When you're presenting, you want to be able to give those kind of examples, but it's hard to know what's going to resonate with everyone. And I'm really grateful, Mo, that you also enjoyed the son to dance and the girl to soccer, because why not?
Beautiful. So we do have 2 questions. If we could quickly smash through them and then we'll wrap up today's session. So what if you're coming into a negotiation that you were unprepared to have? For example, getting backed into a corner, but you know if you don't speak up in the moment, you may lose your chance to get that resolution.
So that's a fantastic question. And that actually is a negotiating tactic that the other person is almost like a surprise attack and bringing it on you. There's another really great book that I didn't reference here, but it's called The Art and Science of Negotiation by Howard Rafer. And in that, he outlines 34 characteristics of an effective negotiator. And you think that like persuasiveness or ability to listen is going to be number one. Number one is planning and preparation. So your negotiation is only as good as the planning and preparation that you go into it. And if someone's trying to surprise you with that, I really strongly, to the extent that you can, say to them, I'm not prepared to have this discussion with you right now. I value both of our time and I'd like to contribute in a meaningful way. I'm asking for some time to go away and prepare a response. I know that's not always going to work, but it also is a de-escalation technique, because you're allowing then the bully surprise attack, I'm using the word bully, but the surprise attack that's come out of nowhere, they're ramped up, they're ready to go, they're full of that heightened anxiety that we were talking about. You want to conflate that so that then you're able to contribute in a more meaningful way. So asking for some time to step away and think about it is what I would really try and do if it's available to you.
Yeah. The other question is there ever a right moment to have a negotiation, such as a typical setting or timing that would make it more successful?
So it's not like a, Thursday at 3 o'clock kind of situation, but there are definitely some things you can do that creates a really great environment for conciliation. One of those things, really interestingly, research was done into this. If you are holding a warm mug or something warm in your hands, a warm beverage, you are more likely to be conciliatory and resolve an issue. So actually having a cuppa while you're having a mediation or a chat, or, like if you think about the Japanese and their tea ceremonies and whatnot, that's actually really going to make both of you more focused on the resolution. So if you can, try and bring a warm beverage into the situation, allowing both parties to have the time to prepare and really having clear expectations as to the objective that you're trying to achieve. That then sets you up for success. And it comes back to that planning and preparation that I was just talking about. Not only does it mean planning and prep in terms of you understanding the landscape in which you're going to negotiate, but it also means that there's a really clear structure and a really clear idea as to what kind of agreement you're going to arrive at. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to have, foresaw the agreement that you're going to come to, but just know that there is some steps to resolution in place, and defining those are really going to make the whole path of negotiation a lot easier.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Look, I'm going to be selfish and ask if you could answer a question for me. But if I'm ever in a negotiation setting, I generally get like the hot flush, the chest rash, a top fast, like the whole 9 yards. What would you recommend for someone like me that the emotion really does come into play and kind of those very physical signs that I'm not having a good time?
And Carly, you're not going to like the answer to this. The answer is practice. Yeah. So you need to just put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. And I know we know grounding techniques. I know we know how to slow it down. But just even if in like the next uncomfortable conversation you have to have, if that's all you focus on is just practicing managing your physiological response, you're already on a win. And the more that you practice that, the better it's going to get. The only other thing I would add to it is plan your difficult conversations. Actually write them down. Have a list of responses or a list of questions that you think, okay, they're going to say this. I could say this, this, or this in response. And while you may not need all of that, just having that sense of security because of the thoroughness with which you've prepared, it's going to come through, and you're going to feel a lot more calm, and there's going to be less of that anxiety.
Absolutely. Maybe I need to stop drinking so much coffee before going into
That's also a fantastic idea.
I love Michaeli. That's how we pronounce her name. I think I might have done that wrong again. But yeah, Mo, get your colleague a warm drink. Awesome. Well, look, guys, we are going to leave it there. Amanda, thank you so much for your time. I've actually loved this morning's session. I knew I was going to take away a lot, but like I literally had to turn the page because I took so many notes, which is kind of embarrassing, but also very helpful. I really appreciate like the time you put into this, and I'm sure it's been really helpful for the community. And please go connect with Amanda on LinkedIn. As I mentioned, that's how we've met Amanda, was through the community, and she is so selfless. She's always willing to give her time. So Mo, if you need help, I'm putting Amanda's hand up for her. I'm sure she'd love to help get a resolution there as well. Any final words, Amanda?
No, thank you for having me today, and thank you for giving me your time. I'm incredibly grateful.
Beautiful. Awesome. Have a great day, guys, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.